Hey guys, this is my Wednesday check-in video, just to tell you guys I hope that you're doing really well. At this point, you should have completed the Gutenberg web quest, and I believe the last video that I posted and the Martin Luther notes with the slides. So I hope that that's where we're at. Again, I want to reiterate that the due dates on Google Classroom, you don't have to take pictures of your work and post it in Google Classroom. Those are just to keep you on schedule, keep you on track. You're going to turn all of your work into me the day that we get back, whenever that may be. So don't worry about taking pictures of your work. That brings us to today. I posted a video about this, I thought. I guess it either just didn't save or something happened, but this is a new one about the Protestant Reformation Reading. And instead of going through and reading both pages to you aloud, I really want you to take your own personal time with this and break it down paragraph by paragraph. What I am going to do is go through the notes with you. And as you can see, I have written in my own here. And what I'd like for you to do is after you're done reading, please fill it in accordingly. So I hate that we can't do this in the regular classroom because the Reformation is such a complex topic, and it's such a revolutionary thing, but we're going to do our best doing it here this way. So by this point, you guys, if you haven't heard about him before, you now know who Martin Luther is. He's a lawyer turned monk that really started to question and have issues with how the church was conducting themselves, and specifically the power that priests and the Pope were exercising over the people. He was not okay with that. And the Renaissance, that's what we studied before we left. The Renaissance is a really key time, and it's really important in the sequence of events up to the Reformation because the Renaissance is going to influence humanism. And as you guys know, the humanism is all about the individual and focusing on you as a person, and that, you within yourself are beautiful and have dignity and worth. And Martin Luther, whether he means to or not, is really going to take that idea and spiritualize it. And what he's going to say ultimately is that you yourself should be able to have a personal relationship with God without having to go through priests or buy indulgences, which we'll talk about in a second. So if you're looking at your notes, here are mine. And how this is organized, obviously you have your topic. And then the essential question is, how did the Reformation help to spread democratic ideas? And when we think about democracy, you have to think about your own personal ownership of your government. And again, with humanism and Martin Luther spiritualizing the individual, and now when we kind of look through it as him almost bringing democracy to the church, essentially, if you get what I'm saying. He's taking democracy, this idea that people have a say in their government, and he's applying it to church. So people now have a say in the church, according to Martin Luther. So to get started, when we talk about what were the causes of Reformation, that's this first section here. Renaissance focused on the secular rather than the church. Okay, that's the first blank. And on the individual, that's the second blank. Challenged Catholic Church authority. Because you got to remember, the Pope and the priests, think all the way back to the Middle Ages, they were the ones that were in charge of how things went with faith. The printing press, which, gosh, I wish we could have spent more time on together, in the classroom, because Gutenberg's printing press is probably, it's like the Apple of his time, if you know what I'm saying. It's the iPhone of Renaissance times, of Reformation times. It revolutionizes everything. It's like the first laptop, almost, the first computer. This idea that you can print, you can have mass production of ideas and books. And so people all over Europe now are going to be able to read, whereas before only people who could afford the limited copies of books that were available, or people who could read, period, could have them. And now that there's mass production of books, more people are learning how to read and more people have access to information, particularly Martin Luther's information. So the printing press is going to spread secular ideas. Also, just like Italy was divided into city-states during the Reformation, or during the Renaissance, Germany was divided into little kingdoms. Okay, and that's really hard for one person to control all these different kingdoms. It's really hard for the Pope to finish this bullet point. Divided German kingdoms were too difficult for the Pope to gain control. And Martin Luther is German, by the way. Also, people are going to be giving the church a lot of money. The church is going to be taxing people directly. And they're also, again, going to be practicing this thing called indulgences, which we'll talk about more in a moment. But Northern European merchants resented, and this blank here is paying church taxes. All right, they resented having to take their money, and this isn't like, I don't want you guys to get this confused with tithing, because that's not what this is. They're not resenting having to tithe, they're resenting paying like taxes that were levied upon them. So those are different things. So with all of these things leading up to this big event, Martin Luther, and he's going to come out with some criticisms that he's not the only person thinking these things, by the way. There are other people around. People are starting to notice this. Church leaders. And I only filled in 2 bullet points. I know it gives you 3 under what were the criticisms of the church, but I just picked the 2 big ideas for both. So I'm only going to have you write 2. So the church leaders were, number 1, concerned with luxury. Okay, they were concerned with luxury. They wanted nice, the finer things in life, all right, which by definition, they're not really supposed to want. So this is their human nature coming through. And then second, political power. The church was very political, very politicized. The church had a lot of say in the government. You guys remember the feudal pyramid. Well, technically the king was at the top, but who was really at the top? The church. Everybody had to do what the church said. The church was incredibly political. So those are 2 things that the church wasn't necessarily maybe intended to be that it became. And Martin Luther and others didn't like that. And then we talk about like priests. Like these are like kind of the lower level people who are working in like everybody's communities. Priests, first off, Martin Luther felt that priests lacked the education that they needed to be able to inform the people of Christ and how they should live their lives. And you got to think what education means to Martin Luther. He was a lawyer, so he's very well read. He's very legalistic. He's very smart. And when you think about, for instance, your teachers at school, right? Like they have to be educated in order to teach you that material. And the problem was here is that the priests didn't have the education that they needed in order to really inform people of how to live their lives. That's not good. They could be giving misinformation. They could be interpreting the Bible incorrectly, which is definitely a problem. And then they could just be making stuff up, which was also most likely an issue. Also, and kind of branching off of making stuff up, the second point here is that priests led immoral lives. Immoral, I-M-M-O-R-A-L. And what that means is they are leading a life that is not Christ-like. They're not living with morals. Sorry, this is my cat. They are not living with morals. They're living lives that priests shouldn't live, that church people shouldn't live. And again, that's going to be a problem. Martin Luther, like I said, he was a German monk. So, German monk. Okay, and how he chose to challenge his church, how he chose to post his ideas was super public and really very much a statement. He wrote what is called the 95 Theses. So he wrote down like a list of 95 things that he felt were fundamentally wrong with the church. And then he posted that on the door of his local church for everybody to see, everybody to read that could read it. And this is, again, like, this isn't he's, like, coming into, sorry, my cat's going nuts. This isn't him, like, behind closed doors approaching the Pope or the priest and being like, hey, like, maybe we should work this out. Have you thought about these things? Like, he's actually upset about this, and he wants other people to know. He's making a really big statement here by posting it on the church doors. Okay, so moving on, Martin Luther had 3 fundamental teachings. And these teachings were not referenced specifically in this reading, so I'm going to spell them, and I'm going to show you what they are. And those 3 things, they're in Latin, are sola scriptura, sola fide, and sola gratia. All right, number 1 is the sola scriptura, okay? And what that means, what it translates to, is by scripture alone. When we look at the word sola, it sounds a lot like solo, right? And that's 1. And then scriptura, the scripture. Okay, so by scripture alone. Moving on to sola fide, and that's going to be your second one. Oh my gosh, Mimi, stop. You're being mean. Sola fide is by faith alone. Again, you have sola, which is solo, and fide, faith, by faith alone. And then finally, sola gratia. So sola, again, that's 1. And then gratia is grace. So by grace alone. So sola scriptura, sola fide, and sola gratia. Sola scriptura is spelled SOLA and that is, again, by scripture alone. Sola fide is spelled SOLAFIDE. All right, sola fide, by faith alone. And then sola gratia is spelled SOLAGRATIA, and that is by grace alone. Hey, we're not playing right now. Sorry, guys. Working from home has its challenges, too. Also, the ringer on my phone is broken, so you can probably hear that buzzing, but just ignore it. So Martin Luther comes out with this statement. He nails it on the church. And by scripture alone, what that means is you can only be saved through what the scripture actually says. And you know what's not in there? Indulgences. An indulgence is this practice by which people would pay to have their sins forgiven, okay? Which you can already kind of see the immorality in that. So they would pay to have their sins forgiven. Pay priests, pay the church, and they would be given this like statement of paper, being like a receipt almost for their sins. And what he's saying is that's not in scripture, so that's not a thing. All right, next is sola fide. You can only be saved through your faith, all right, through faith. Meaning like your faith in God is enough. You don't have to pray through a priest. You personally can pray, okay? Which is, I'm sure a lot of y'all, where you go to church, that's what you practice. And then finally, sola gratia, by grace alone.